The airport was bustling with life that morning. People rushed past each other, dragging bags, checking flight information, and hurrying to make their connections. Families, business travelers, tourists, and solo travelers all moved in a flow that was both chaotic and familiar. Among them was a young girl about 12 years old, walking alongside her father. She carried a small backpack and held onto a colorful travel journal, her excitement barely contained. This trip had been planned for months, and she couldn't wait to see the places they had read about and explored in stories. Her father kept a steady hand on her shoulder, making sure she stayed close in the crowded terminal. He had always been protective, not just because she was his daughter, but because he knew the world could be unfair, sometimes cruel, especially to people who didn't look like others around them. He had spent his life preparing to protect and guide her, and he could feel the responsibility weighing on him as they moved through the airport. But today he wanted her to focus on the fun, on the adventures ahead, not the tension that lingered in places where prejudice hid quietly, waiting for a moment to show itself. They approached the boarding gate where passengers were starting to line up. Flight attendants were checking tickets, scanning boarding passes, and directing people to the correct lines. The girl's eyes sparkled with curiosity as she watched everything around her. She pointed out the different planes, the baggage handlers, and the pilots walking confidently toward the aircraft. Her father smiled, enjoying her wonder even as he scanned the crowd himself. There were always people who made the world feel a little more hostile, and he had learned to notice the signs early. As they boarded the plane, the girl clutched her father's hand tightly. She was assigned a window seat in the middle of the economy cabin, and he settled into the aisle seat beside her. They unpacked her backpack, carefully stowing her journal and a small water bottle in the overhead bin. The cabin smelled faintly of coffee and cleaning solution, with the low hum of conversation all around. Flight attendants moved up and down the aisles, greeting passengers with polite smiles. Everything seemed normal, peaceful even, and for a moment her father allowed himself to relax. But it didn't take long for the first ripple of tension to reach them. A passenger seated a few rows ahead turned in his seat and gave the girl a sharp, scrutinizing look. He muttered something under his breath, barely audible, but his tone was unmistakable. Disapproval. The father noticed immediately, his instincts alert. He watched the man shift uncomfortably, and soon the murmurs became louder. The man stood up, clearly ignoring the flight attendant who was attempting to calm him, and his voice carried over the hum of the cabin. "This seat should not be occupied by her," he said, loud enough for several nearby passengers to hear. "She needs to move." "She's in the wrong place," the words hit the girl hard. She froze, unsure of what to do, her small hands gripping the edge of the seat. Her father immediately rose, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. His voice was calm but firm as he spoke to the man. "Excuse me, sir," he said. "My daughter is sitting in the seat assigned to her by the airline. She has every right to be there." The man scoffed, clearly unconvinced, and waved dismissively. "I don't care about your papers. That seat isn't for her. She needs to go somewhere else. Now." The flight attendants quickly approached, sensing the situation escalating. They asked the man to calm down and reminded him that the seats were assigned and paid for. The girl's hands were trembling slightly, but her father's presence gave her a sense of safety. He knelt beside her, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "Don't worry," he whispered. "You are exactly where you're supposed to be. I'm right here and nothing is going to hurt you." The girl nodded, trying to steady her breathing. She looked around at the other passengers, some of whom were staring awkwardly, others whispering to each other. Some faces showed concern, some confusion, and a few displayed annoyance that the scene was unfolding in their vicinity. The father knew that public situations like this could escalate quickly, especially when people felt emboldened by ignorance and prejudice. He had to manage both the immediate threat and the emotions swirling inside his daughter. The man continued to argue, now turning his attention to the flight attendants, claiming that the airline staff had made a mistake. He gestured toward the girl as if pointing out a crime. The tension in the cabin grew, passengers shifting uncomfortably in their seats, some looking down at their phones to avoid confrontation, others silently observing, ready to intervene if necessary. The girl's father remained calm, his posture relaxed but authoritative. He had dealt with difficult people before, and he knew that showing panic or anger could make the situation worse. "Sir, please sit down," he said firmly. "This conversation is over. My daughter will remain in her assigned seat, and I will handle any further issues." The man laughed dismissively, but there was an edge of uncertainty in his tone. He had expected compliance, perhaps some fear or argument, but not the calm authority in the father's voice. The girl glanced at her father, her eyes wide. She didn't fully understand why the man was behaving this way, but she felt comforted knowing her dad was in control. Other passengers began to whisper among themselves, some expressing quiet support for the girl and her father. A few leaned toward the aisle, watching closely. The flight attendants reinforced their instructions, politely but firmly telling the man to return to his own seat. Yet the man persisted, his voice rising with frustration. He seemed determined to prove a point, though it was unclear to anyone else what that point was besides making the girl uncomfortable. The father took a deep breath, assessing the situation. He knew that this was not just about a seat. It was about prejudice, entitlement, and the dangerous belief some people had that they could intimidate others without consequence. He had prepared for many things in life, but protecting his daughter from ignorance disguised as authority required patience, courage, and timing. He looked at the girl, gave her a small nod, and signaled that everything would be fine. The girl felt a mix of fear and pride. Fear because the man's words were harsh and unfair. Pride because her father was standing up for her so confidently. She gripped her father's hand and tried to focus on his calm demeanor, the steady rhythm of his voice, and the quiet support from the surrounding passengers. For several minutes, the cabin held its collective breath. The man's voice continued, though now with growing hesitation as he realized that neither the flight attendants nor the father would yield. The tension was palpable, yet the father's calm control created a buffer, preventing the situation from spiraling further. Every passenger could sense the silent message. The girl was safe, and the man's aggressive behavior was unacceptable. Eventually, the father leaned closer to the girl and whispered something reassuring, just enough for her to hear. He reminded her that she was strong, that she deserved her seat, and that the man's words said more about him than anyone else. The girl nodded, swallowing her fear and trying to take comfort in his presence. She knew that having him there made all the difference. By the time the plane began its taxiing toward the runway, the man's persistence had quieted, though a tense edge remained in his eyes. The father remained vigilant, watching, ready to act if necessary, but also allowing his daughter to feel the small victories of resilience and protection. She leaned back in her seat, holding her journal and opening it to a blank page, ready to write about the emotions of the morning, the lessons learned, and the feeling of safety that came from having her father by her side. The flight attendants moved down the aisles, preparing for takeoff, but the memory of the confrontation lingered in the air. The father remained seated, his arm around the girl, reassuring her silently with his presence. He knew this was just the beginning of the story they would tell together, a story of courage, dignity, and the quiet power of standing firm in the face of ignorance. The girl looked out the window as the plane lifted into the sky, feeling a mixture of relief and determination. She had faced an uncomfortable and unfair situation, but she had done so with her father beside her. That small sense of triumph, the knowledge that she was protected and valued, filled her with a quiet confidence. She opened her journal and began to write, capturing the scene in her own words, expressing the swirl of emotions that came with both fear and the reassurance of love and protection. In that moment, the father watched his daughter, proud of her courage, yet acutely aware that the world would continue to challenge her. He knew that protecting her meant more than physical safety. It meant teaching her how to navigate difficult situations, stand her ground, and hold on to her dignity no matter what others might say or do. Today had been a test, and together they had passed it, quietly but powerfully. As the plane ascended into the clear morning sky, the father squeezed her hand gently and smiled. She returned the gesture, a small, grateful smile, feeling safe, seen, and loved. The journey had begun, not just to a destination in miles, but to a lesson in strength, resilience, and the unwavering bond between parent and child. The plane had just leveled off when the tension that had been simmering earlier began to flare again. The young girl tried to focus on the view outside her window, watching the clouds drift by like soft white cotton. She wanted to forget the rude comments from the man a few rows ahead, but the memory clung to her. Every time she shifted in her seat, she caught sight of him staring back, his eyes narrowed and lips pressed into a tight line. He looked angry, uncomfortable with her presence and stubbornly unwilling to accept that she had every right to sit where she was. Her father noticed immediately. He leaned back in his seat but kept a careful watch over the man. Calm as he seemed, his mind worked quickly, analyzing the situation. He had seen tension like this before, and he knew that if the man's aggression escalated, it could disrupt the entire flight. The father gently touched his daughter's hand to reassure her. "Stay calm," he whispered. "I'm right here. Nothing is going to happen to you." The girl nodded, but she felt her chest tighten. The flight attendants walked past, checking on other passengers, unaware that the man was watching them, as if looking for an ally. It was clear that he felt justified in his anger, convinced that he could intimidate the girl or force the airline to change her seat. His behavior was subtle at first, a cold stare, a muttered comment, but soon his actions became louder and harder to ignore. "Do you really belong here?" he asked loudly, just enough for several nearby passengers to hear. "Because it doesn't look like it." The girl's hands tightened around her journal. Her stomach churned and she glanced at her father, searching for the reassurance he had given earlier. He smiled slightly, squeezing her hand, his presence a shield against the hostility she felt. But he knew he could not let this continue unchecked. He took a deep breath and spoke firmly to the man. "Sir, that's enough," he said calmly. "My daughter is sitting in her assigned seat. Please take your seat and stop harassing her." The man laughed, but it was a hollow, bitter laugh. "You think just because you're here with her that I'll back down?" he asked, shaking his head. "I pay good money for my ticket. I should be comfortable not looking at her all flight." The father remained calm, knowing that reacting angrily could make the situation worse. Instead, he leaned slightly forward, maintaining eye contact with the man. "This conversation is over," he said. "You are making the situation uncomfortable for everyone, including yourself. Sit down now, or we will involve the authorities when we land." The man's eyes flicked toward the flight attendants, perhaps hoping for support, but they stood silently nearby, their faces professional, patient, and firm. One of them cleared her throat and said, "Sir, please remain in your seat. The passengers have been assigned seats by the airline. Your cooperation is required." It was clear that the man was growing frustrated. He muttered something under his breath, then leaned back slightly, though his eyes never left the girl. The tension in the cabin was tangible. Other passengers began whispering, some casting uncomfortable glances toward the aisle, while others shook their heads at the man's behavior. The father noticed a few sympathetic nods from people nearby, and he knew that the silent support of others could sometimes help diffuse hostility. The girl tried to focus on something else, turning her attention to her journal. She opened it and began to sketch the scene outside the window, using the clouds to calm herself. Her father noticed her attempt and gave her a small nod of approval. "That's good," he whispered. "Focus on what makes you happy. Ignore the rest." But ignoring the man became impossible as he stood up again, this time speaking louder and gesturing toward the girl. "I want her moved. Now," he demanded. His voice carried across the aisle, attracting the attention of nearby passengers and flight attendants. The father could feel the girl tense next to him. He knew that if the situation escalated any further, it could become chaotic. He had to act decisively. He stood up, placing a hand gently on the girl's shoulder. "Listen to me," he said quietly but firmly. "Do not be afraid. I am right here, and I will not let him harm you in any way. I will handle this." The man scoffed and waved him off, clearly thinking he was bluffing. But the father's calm demeanor and unwavering stance created a subtle pressure. He didn't raise his voice, didn't make threats, yet the certainty in his tone suggested that he was someone who could handle whatever came next. A few passengers had begun to record the situation on their phones, quietly, not wanting to interfere directly but feeling that what they were witnessing was wrong. The cabin was filled with a mixture of curiosity, discomfort, and growing awareness that the man's behavior was unacceptable. The girl noticed the cameras and felt a small sense of relief, realizing that she was not alone in being supported by others. The father leaned closer to the man and spoke, his voice still calm but carrying an unmistakable authority. "Sir, you need to sit down. Your behavior is unacceptable and you are harassing a child. This is your final warning." The man froze, his expression betraying a flicker of fear for the first time. He muttered something under his breath but did not sit. Instead, he glanced around the cabin, perhaps realizing that the attention of other passengers and the flight attendants had shifted squarely onto him. The father turned slightly to the flight attendants. "If he does not comply, I expect you to follow protocol," he said quietly. "But I will handle this myself if necessary." The girl looked up at her father, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and pride. She had seen him handle situations before, but never in a setting like this, surrounded by strangers under such public scrutiny. She felt a sense of security she couldn't quite put into words. The man's stubbornness, however, had not yet faded. He leaned forward, gesturing toward the girl, his voice shaking slightly now. "You think you can stop me?" he said. "She doesn't belong here." The father took a slow, steady breath, then leaned slightly forward, meeting the man's gaze. "I will not allow you to intimidate my daughter. This ends now. Sit down." There was a tense silence. Passengers shifted in their seats, some whispering to one another, others watching with wide eyes. The flight attendants remained professional, ready to intervene if necessary, but giving the father the space to assert authority. The girl felt her heart racing, but the calm in her father's presence kept her grounded. Suddenly, the father reached into his jacket pocket and produced a small badge, holding it discreetly but clearly visible to the man. The FBI emblem caught the man's eye and his mouth went dry. His confidence faltered. The authority that had been calm but hidden was now visible, undeniable. The man's eyes widened in shock as he realized that the father was not just anyone. He was someone who had the power and training to enforce the law. The shift in the cabin was immediate. Passengers straightened, noticing the sudden change in dynamics. The man who had been so vocal and aggressive moments before froze completely. His words stuck in his throat. The flight attendant stepped in quickly, reinforcing the father's position and quietly telling the man that he must remain seated or face serious consequences. The girl could barely believe her eyes. She looked at her father, a mixture of awe and relief washing over her. In an instant, the hostility that had loomed over them disappeared. The man, now fully aware of the consequences of his actions, slumped back into his seat, defeated and silent. Her father lowered his badge and gave her a reassuring smile. "See?" he whispered. "Everything is okay now. You are safe." The girl exhaled, the tension draining from her body. She hugged her journal to her chest and leaned back in her seat, finally allowing herself to relax. She glanced around at the other passengers, many of whom were giving quiet nods of approval or subtle smiles of encouragement. She realized that she wasn't alone, that people could recognize right from wrong even when the situation was uncomfortable. The remainder of the flight passed with a sense of relief and quiet vigilance. The man no longer caused any trouble, and the cabin slowly returned to its normal rhythm. Passengers read, watched screens, or quietly chatted, but the memory of the confrontation lingered. The girl's father stayed close, offering quiet comfort and reassurance whenever she glanced nervously at the aisle. By the time the plane began its descent, the girl felt a mixture of exhaustion and pride. She had faced a difficult situation and survived it with her father by her side. She had learned something important about courage, authority, and the strength of calm determination. The father reminded her that standing up for oneself and for what is right could change a situation in ways that fear and anger never could. The plane touched down smoothly, and passengers began gathering their belongings. The father remained close, guiding his daughter through the crowd, careful to ensure her safety and dignity. Though the encounter was over, its lessons lingered, a quiet reminder of resilience, authority, and the protective bond between a parent and child. The girl looked at her father, a smile forming despite the earlier tension. She had witnessed strength, calm, and decisiveness in action, and she knew that no matter what challenges came in life, she had someone who would always stand by her. The cabin had finally settled after the father had revealed his badge, but the atmosphere still carried a quiet tension. The man who had caused the disturbance sat frozen, his hands gripping the armrests tightly, staring at the father with wide eyes. He seemed incapable of speaking, as if the realization of who he was dealing with had left him temporarily paralyzed. Other passengers watched in silence, sensing the shift in power. The young girl seated beside her father felt a mixture of relief and awe. She could hardly believe what had just happened. Her father's calm authority had stopped the man in his tracks. Her father remained seated, his posture relaxed yet alert. He knew the man might still attempt something reckless, so he stayed close to his daughter, keeping one hand lightly on her shoulder. He whispered quietly to her, "Stay calm. He knows better now. Nothing else will happen." The girl nodded, still holding tightly onto her journal. She had wanted to draw to take her mind off the incident, but now she simply watched, feeling a mix of fear, relief, and pride in her father's actions. The man finally broke the silence, but his voice was weak and uncertain, lacking the confidence he had shown before. I didn't know," he stammered, his face pale. He glanced nervously at the flight attendants and other passengers, realizing that his aggressive behavior had left him isolated. The father met his gaze calmly, letting the silence stretch just long enough for the man to understand the gravity of his actions. "You did know," the father said quietly but firmly. "You knew your behavior was wrong, and yet you continued. That ends now. Sit quietly in your seat." The man's hands shook slightly and he lowered his head, muttering something under his breath. The other passengers relaxed slightly, sensing that the immediate threat had passed, though the tension in the air was still noticeable. The flight attendants moved closer to the man, speaking to him in professional, calm tones. "Sir, please remain in your seat for the remainder of the flight," one said. "This is your final warning. Any further disruptions will be handled seriously." The man nodded, unable to respond verbally, and leaned back in his seat, his posture slumped and defeated. The young girl turned to her father, her eyes wide with curiosity. "Dad," she whispered, "why did he stop?" "Was it because of your badge?" Her father smiled softly. "Partly," he said, "but mostly, it's because he realized that continuing to be mean or aggressive would only make things worse for him. Authority is not about being loud or angry, it's about being calm, clear, and firm. That's what changed him." The girl thought about this for a moment, trying to understand. It was strange to see someone so confident and aggressive suddenly shrink into silence. She had never experienced anything like it before. She realized that her father had not just protected her physically, but had also taught an important lesson about standing firm in the face of unfairness. The man seemed to shrink even further into his seat, and the father noticed that he had stopped fidgeting entirely. His attention was now divided between following the instructions of the flight attendants and avoiding eye contact with anyone. The girl felt a sense of calm spread through her. She leaned back, allowing herself to finally relax, and opened her journal. This time, instead of drawing, she began to write about what had just happened, her handwriting careful and precise. She wrote about fear, about courage, and about the strange power of quiet authority. The father watched her for a moment, feeling proud. He knew that experiences like this could be confusing and scary, but they were also opportunities for learning. He whispered to her again, "What happened here is not just about being scared or angry. It's about knowing your rights, standing firm, and staying calm no matter what someone else does. That's how you win without hurting anyone." The girl nodded, her eyes shining with understanding. Meanwhile, the man remained silent, occasionally glancing at the badge again, as if reminding himself of the authority standing beside the girl. He seemed aware that any further confrontation would have serious consequences, both in front of the passengers and legally. The father allowed him a moment of realization, letting the weight of his authority sink in without needing to say anything more. Other passengers began to resume their activities. Some returned to reading, others watched movies, and a few quietly discussed the earlier confrontation in hushed tones. There was a sense of shared relief, a collective sigh that the situation had been resolved without escalating further. The father kept a protective arm near his daughter, aware that she was still absorbing the experience, processing her emotions, and learning a lesson about courage and safety. The flight continued, and the father made small efforts to help his daughter feel normal again. He asked her what she wanted to do, read, draw, or watch a movie. She chose to write in her journal, and he smiled, appreciating her focus. He knew that giving her a sense of control over her actions was important after the stressful encounter. He also used the opportunity to quietly teach her about observing people, understanding behavior, and recognizing the difference between confidence and arrogance, courage and aggression. Occasionally, the man in the other seat would glance over, perhaps out of lingering resentment or embarrassment, but he no longer spoke, no longer attempted to assert dominance. The father noticed, and he kept a calm watch, making sure the girl did not feel threatened. He whispered to her again, "See? Sometimes people need to realize on their own when they are wrong. You don't always need to force it. Calm authority can make them see it clearly." The girl smiled slightly, feeling the truth in her father's words. She had learned that strength was not just physical or loud. It was calm, consistent, and backed by confidence and knowledge. She continued to write, capturing every detail: the fear, the confrontation, the quiet power, and the lessons she was learning. Writing became her way to process the emotions swirling inside her, a way to regain control and find clarity. The man occasionally shifted in his seat, clearly uncomfortable, but he did not speak to the girl again. The flight attendants checked in periodically, ensuring that everything was calm and orderly. The cabin had returned to a state of normalcy, but the lesson of the confrontation lingered in the minds of many passengers. They had witnessed someone's inappropriate behavior being corrected not with anger, but with calm, firm authority. The father took a moment to reflect silently. He had managed to protect his daughter, while also sending a message about respect, rights, and consequences. He had done so without escalating the situation further, without anger or violence, but with patience and strategic action. It was a moment of quiet victory, and he felt proud of both himself and his daughter. She had remained composed, brave, and trusting throughout the ordeal. The girl looked at her father with admiration. "I think I understand now," she said softly. "You didn't need to shout or be mean, you just showed him he couldn't scare us." Her father nodded. "Exactly. That's the lesson here. Standing firm with calm authority can stop even the most aggressive behavior without anyone getting hurt." The remainder of the flight passed peacefully. The father and daughter talked quietly, sharing observations about the clouds outside, discussing what they would do when they landed, and planning the fun activities that awaited them. The girl still felt a mix of emotions: fear, relief, pride, but she was no longer overwhelmed. She had experienced a difficult situation and had come through it safely, with the support and protection of her father. As the plane prepared to descend, the father reminded his daughter of the key lesson she had learned that day: that courage was about calmness, not aggression; that standing firm in the face of unfairness required patience, and that understanding authority and respect could change situations without conflict. She nodded, feeling a sense of maturity and confidence she hadn't felt before the flight. The landing was smooth, and passengers began gathering their belongings. The father stayed close to his daughter, making sure she remained comfortable and safe amid the crowd. The man who had caused the earlier disturbance avoided eye contact entirely, seemingly aware that his behavior had been noticed by everyone. The girl felt a sense of quiet triumph, knowing that she had faced an uncomfortable situation and emerged stronger, protected by someone she trusted completely. Once they were off the plane, the father reminded her, "What happened today will stay with you, but it's important to remember that you can handle difficult situations with dignity and calmness. You don't need to be afraid, and you don't need to retaliate. The right actions will speak louder than anger ever could." The girl smiled, understanding that this was not just about a flight. It was about life, about facing unfairness, and about growing stronger in the process. The airport was busy, but the father and daughter moved confidently through the crowd, their bond stronger than ever. She had learned a valuable lesson about courage, patience, and authority, and she knew that her father's guidance would always be a shield, a source of wisdom, and a model for handling difficult situations. The incident on the plane would remain in her memory, not as a moment of fear, but as a moment of learning, protection, and quiet empowerment. She had seen firsthand that calm, firm authority could overcome aggression, and she had learned that standing up for herself with guidance and support was both possible and necessary. By the time they reached the terminal exit, the girl felt a mixture of relief, pride, and gratitude. She knew that life would present challenges like this again, but she also knew that she could face them with dignity, courage, and the support of those who cared for her. Today had been a lesson in resilience, awareness, and the power of calm authority, the kind of lesson that would stay with her for years to come. The plane continued on its path toward the destination, the hum of the engines a comforting background noise. For the young girl, the tension from earlier had slowly started to fade, though a flicker of anxiety remained whenever she glanced toward the man who had caused the trouble. He sat silently, head down, clearly trying to avoid drawing any attention to himself. The father remained close, keeping a calm, watchful eye on both his daughter and the surrounding passengers. He knew that even though the immediate confrontation had passed, the experience had left its mark on her. He wanted to ensure that she felt safe, reassured, and supported. The flight attendants moved down the aisle, checking in with passengers and making small talk where appropriate. Their professional composure helped restore a sense of normalcy in the cabin. Some passengers whispered quietly to one another, commenting on the earlier situation, sharing relief that the confrontation had been handled without escalation. Many were clearly impressed by the father's calm authority and the way he had managed the incident. The young girl noticed these glances and began to feel a growing sense of pride and gratitude toward her father. Her father leaned slightly toward her, speaking softly. "Remember, what happened today is not just about fear or anger," he said. "It's about staying calm, understanding your rights, and knowing how to respond when someone is wrong. That's the power you carry inside yourself. Always remember that." The girl nodded, feeling the truth of his words. She had seen the difference that composure and confidence could make in a difficult situation, and she wanted to hold on to that lesson for the future. The man who had caused the disruption occasionally shifted in his seat, still avoiding eye contact. His behavior had changed completely from the arrogance and insistence he had shown earlier. Now he appeared uneasy and self-conscious, aware that he had been observed and that his actions had been judged by others. The father noticed the subtle changes in his demeanor and realized that the confrontation had left a lasting impact, not just on the man, but also on the surrounding passengers. The girl felt a sense of relief, knowing that the man would no longer be a threat. The cabin slowly began to return to a sense of normalcy. Passengers focused on reading, listening to music, or watching movies. The girl opened her journal again, this time jotting down her thoughts about courage, authority, and the lessons she had learned from the incident. She wrote carefully, her handwriting neat, capturing the emotions that had filled her chest earlier: the fear, the tension, and now the relief and pride. Writing became her way to process the experience, to make sense of the conflicting feelings, and to find her own understanding of what had happened. Her father watched her quietly, proud of her composure and resilience. He had guided her through the incident, protecting her while also giving her the space to observe, reflect, and learn. He leaned back slightly in his seat, glancing at the other passengers, many of whom now looked at the girl and her father with respect and admiration. He realized that their calm handling of the situation had not only ensured the girl's safety, but had also subtly influenced the atmosphere in the cabin, reminding everyone that fairness and authority mattered. Occasionally, the man would glance toward the father, a mixture of guilt and caution in his expression. The father met his gaze calmly but firmly, making it clear that any further misbehavior would not be tolerated. The man nodded silently, finally settling back in his seat, accepting that the confrontation was over. The girl noticed this and felt a sense of closure, understanding that the problem had been resolved and that she could finally relax fully. The father leaned toward her again and spoke gently. "You did very well today," he said. "It's not easy to stay calm when someone is being unfair or aggressive, but you did it. You stayed strong and you trusted me to protect you. That's important. Always remember that strength comes from patience and calmness, not from anger." The girl smiled slightly, her heart swelling with pride. She had experienced something challenging, yet she had emerged feeling safe, supported, and empowered. As the flight continued, the father took small steps to help his daughter feel more comfortable. He asked her what she wanted to do: read, draw, or watch a movie. She chose to watch a movie, and he handed her the headphones, smiling as she became engrossed in the story. He kept a hand lightly resting on the armrest between them, a subtle reminder that he was there and that she was protected. She began to laugh quietly at the funny parts, allowing herself to enjoy the flight for the first time since boarding. The man who had caused the disruption kept his eyes mostly on the screen in front of him. Occasionally he glanced toward the girl, seemingly aware of the tension he had caused and the authority that had stopped him. The flight attendants moved quietly through the aisle, checking on passengers and maintaining order. They approached the man once more, reminding him politely but firmly to remain seated. He complied, nodding silently, clearly recognizing that further misbehavior would have serious consequences. The father observed all of this calmly, ensuring that the girl did not notice any lingering tension. He wanted her to feel fully safe and to regain a sense of normalcy. He whispered to her, "See? Staying calm works. You don't need to argue or raise your voice. Just stay strong and trust what you know is right." The girl nodded, absorbing the lesson, feeling a quiet sense of empowerment. As the flight progressed, the girl became more relaxed. She leaned back in her seat, occasionally glancing out the window at the clouds and the landscape below. She reflected on what had happened earlier, the fear, the confrontation, and the relief. She realized that her father's calm authority had not only protected her but had also sent a clear message to the man that harassment and aggression would not be tolerated. She felt grateful for his guidance, understanding that he had taught her something important about life and human behavior. The father continued to speak softly to her, helping her process the emotions of the day. "It's okay to feel scared sometimes," he said. "What matters is how you respond. You stayed calm and you trusted me to handle the situation. That's what makes you strong. Always remember that you can face challenges without losing your composure." The girl nodded, her eyes shining with understanding. She felt a sense of pride in herself and in her father's ability to guide her through difficult moments. The man who had caused the disruption remained quiet for the rest of the flight. He avoided interaction, kept his head down, and seemed fully aware of the impact of his earlier behavior. The father observed this, satisfied that the immediate threat had passed. He knew that the lesson for the girl was now complete. She had seen how calm authority, patience, and understanding could resolve even the most uncomfortable situations. As the plane began its descent, the father reminded the girl to gather her belongings and prepare for landing. She did so carefully, making sure her journal, backpack, and small personal items were secure. She felt a mixture of excitement and relief. The journey had been more challenging than she had expected, but she had learned valuable lessons about courage, patience, and authority. Passengers around them began to prepare for landing as well. Some adjusted their seats, fastened seatbelts, and gathered their belongings. The father stayed close to his daughter, offering quiet guidance and reassurance. He whispered, "Remember, you faced this challenge with dignity and strength. That's something to be proud of." She nodded, feeling a deep sense of accomplishment. The plane touched down smoothly, and the cabin filled with the sounds of seatbelts unfastening and luggage being prepared. The father and daughter waited patiently, moving with the flow of passengers as they made their way to the terminal. The man who had caused the earlier disturbance remained quiet and unobtrusive, clearly aware that his behavior had been observed and judged. The girl felt a sense of closure, knowing that the confrontation was truly behind them. Once they reached the terminal, the father gently guided his daughter through the crowd, ensuring she felt safe and confident. He spoke quietly, reminding her of the lessons from the flight. "Today was more than just a trip on a plane," he said. "It was a lesson in courage, patience, and authority. You stayed strong and calm, and you saw how calm actions can stop aggression. That's something you can use in many parts of your life." The girl smiled, understanding the depth of what he was saying. She had faced fear, confusion, and tension, but she had emerged stronger, more confident, and more aware of how to handle difficult situations. The father's guidance and calm authority had shown her the power of composure, understanding, and patience. By the time they exited the terminal, the girl felt a mixture of relief, pride, and gratitude. She knew that the lessons from the flight would stay with her. She had seen firsthand how calm authority and patience could protect someone from harm, and she had learned that standing firm in the face of unfairness required both courage and composure. The father and daughter walked together side by side, ready to continue their journey. The incident on the flight had left its mark, but it had also strengthened their bond and given the girl a deeper understanding of courage, authority, and resilience. She had learned that facing challenges with dignity and calmness was far more powerful than fear, anger, or aggression. The plane had landed smoothly, and the hum of the engine slowly faded as passengers began to unfasten their seatbelts and gather their belongings. For the young girl, the sense of relief was overwhelming. She had survived an intense, uncomfortable situation on the flight, and the lessons she had learned were settling in her mind, like small, shining lights. Her father stayed close, keeping a protective hand near her, quietly guiding her through the cabin as they waited for the other passengers to disembark. The man who had caused the earlier confrontation remained silent, clearly aware of the attention he had drawn during the flight. He avoided looking at anyone, keeping his head down as if retreating into the safety of anonymity. The flight attendants moved calmly through the aisle, ensuring that everyone left the plane safely and without further incident. The girl noticed the difference between the chaos at the beginning of the flight and the quiet order now. She realized that calm authority and patience had restored peace, not anger or aggression. As they stepped onto the jetway and into the terminal, The father whispered to his daughter. Remember, the way we handled that situation shows that courage isn't about fighting or yelling. It's about staying calm, knowing your rights, and trusting in the truth. That's a lesson you can carry with you forever. The girl nodded, her eyes wide, absorbing every word. She felt a mixture of pride, relief, and gratitude for the guidance he had given her. They moved through the terminal, passing travelers who were busy with their own arrivals and departures. Some had overheard parts of the confrontation or witnessed it from a distance. A few passengers gave subtle nods or smiles, acknowledging the way the father had protected his daughter and handled the situation with composure. The girl felt a warm sense of reassurance from the silent support of strangers who had seen the truth of what happened. Once they reached the baggage claim area, the father paused to let his daughter stretch and breathe. She had been tense for hours, holding on to the memory of the confrontation. Now, with the immediate danger gone, she could finally process the emotions she had been carrying. She leaned against her father slightly, feeling safe and comforted by his presence. "Dad," she said quietly, "I think I understand now. I saw how calm you were and how you didn't get angry. You didn't need to fight, you just handled it." Her father smiled, his eyes softening. "Exactly," he said. "Sometimes the strongest way to fight is not to fight at all. You protect yourself and others with patience, calmness, and knowing the right steps to take. That's what makes authority truly powerful." The girl took a deep breath, letting the words sink in. She had seen the truth in action and had been a part of it. She felt a sense of pride not only in her father but in herself for staying composed during such a tense moment. She realized that fear did not have to control her, and that with support and calm thinking, she could navigate difficult situations safely and effectively. The father guided her toward the exit, keeping a watchful eye on the crowds around them. Airports could feel overwhelming even on normal days, and after the earlier confrontation, he wanted to ensure that his daughter felt secure. He held her hand gently but firmly, a reassuring presence that reminded her she was protected and cared for. As they walked through the terminal, the girl reflected on the other passengers' reactions during the flight. She remembered the silent support, the slight nods, and the subtle smiles that had shown her that people could recognize right from wrong. She realized that she was not alone in the world, that there were people who could understand fairness, dignity, and courage. That thought brought a quiet sense of comfort and hope. Once they reached the area where taxis and rideshare cars waited, the father spoke again, making sure the lesson from the day remained fresh in her mind. "Life will give you moments like this sometimes," he said. "Moments when people may be unfair, mean, or even scary. The important thing is how you respond. You stay calm, you know your rights, and you take the proper steps. You don't need to fight with anger. That's the strength you carry." The girl nodded, feeling her confidence grow. She had faced a difficult situation, learned how to respond, and survived it with dignity. The lesson was clear. Strength came from composure, knowledge, and patience, not from shouting or reacting impulsively. She felt grateful for the guidance her father had provided, understanding that he had prepared her for moments she might face in the future. As they settled into their ride, the girl's thoughts turned inward. She thought about the man who had caused the confrontation, about how quickly his confidence had crumbled when faced with calm authority. She understood that people like him could be stopped not by anger, but by steady, firm action. The lesson was subtle but powerful, and it stayed with her as the car moved through the city streets. The father glanced at her, noticing her quiet reflection. "You're thinking about what happened, aren't you?" he asked gently. She nodded. "I'm trying to understand everything. How you stayed calm, how you protected me, and how he stopped." He smiled warmly. "That's good. Thinking about it helps you remember. The lesson is that calm, firm action changes situations more than anger ever could. You saw it happen today." The girl felt a sense of closure. The fear she had carried earlier had been replaced by understanding and pride. She realized that the experience, while uncomfortable, had taught her something valuable about life, about people, and about herself. She had learned that challenges could be faced with dignity and composure, and that she had the ability to remain calm under pressure when guided by knowledge and support. As they approached their destination, the father turned toward her and said, "Remember this moment not for the fear, but for the lessons you learned. You stayed composed. You trusted me. You witnessed authority handled properly. These are things you will carry with you forever. They are more valuable than any trip or adventure." The girl smiled, feeling the weight of his words. She realized that she had grown stronger that day, not just because of her father's protection, but because she had learned to see the world in a clearer, calmer way. She understood that challenges could be faced and resolved without anger, that calm authority could command respect, and that patience and composure were forms of strength that would serve her well throughout life. When they finally reached their destination, the girl and her father walked out of the car together, stepping into the sunlight. She felt a sense of freedom, a release from the tension that had shadowed her for hours. She looked up at the sky and smiled, feeling proud, safe, and empowered. Her father watched her, feeling a quiet pride as well. He knew that today's experience would stay with her, shaping her understanding of courage, authority, and respect. She had faced a challenge, learned valuable lessons, and come through it with dignity. That, he thought, was the true victory. The girl took a deep breath, savoring the moment. She had faced fear, tension, and hostility, and she had learned that calm, confident action could overcome almost anything. She had seen the difference between reacting impulsively and responding thoughtfully, between giving in to fear and standing firm. And she knew, deep in her heart, that these lessons would stay with her for the rest of her life. As they walked together into the city, hand in hand, the father spoke softly one last time. "The world can be unfair sometimes, but you have the strength, patience, and knowledge to handle it. Always remember that. Today you learned something very important. Hold on to it," the girl nodded, smiling. She understood. The day had been difficult, uncomfortable, and even scary at times, but it had also been a lesson in courage, dignity, and the quiet power of calm authority. She had emerged stronger, more aware, and more confident, ready to face the world with the knowledge that she could handle whatever came her way with patience, composure, and strength. As they disappeared into the crowd, the girl felt a sense of closure. The fear and tension were behind her, replaced by pride, understanding, and empowerment. She had learned that standing firm, trusting in the right actions, and staying calm could overcome even the most unfair situations. And she knew that with her father by her side, she could face the future with courage and confidence, ready for whatever challenges lay ahead.